bonjour à tous et bienvenue pour l'un de ces...
Good afternoon, you're welcome to one of the last panels that focus on stock exchange. I will start with this story. 25 years ago, when I was a journalist of Jeune Afrique, I was invited in New York, invited by United Nations for a forum on African stock market. So, 25 years ago, we were discussing issues that we are going to discuss right now. Unfortunately, we all know that the stock markets are fundamental for the development of Africa, especially for financing the private sector. And also, we know that in Africa we have South Africa with small stock market. We don't have a huge and companies in the stock market, and we have just 5 in 2020, and we know that this must change. What is important in this panel is that we are going to be oriented towards solution more than problems. I've talked about it. I will present experts, etc. And we are moving toward solutions because as the aim of this summit, and AFIS wants to find solutions. Let me start by presenting various speakers that are going to address us today.
Estelle.
We call on Estelle Akwik-Komla that will do the expert presentation in a few minutes, and later on we'll have in panel Felix Menunve, CEO of BRVM and President of Association of African Stock Market, Kusini Dlamini, Chairman of Massmart Holding, Khadija Fadiga Kulibali, Managing Director of Hudson CIO, and Kesha Go, Director for Treasury International Finance Corporation, and we'll have people from Angola also. So we have people coming from various countries, United States, India, etc. So I'll give the floor to Estelle for the presentation.
It's a great honor for me to address such a distinguished audience today at AFIS 2022. I'm here today to present facts and figures about our Africa underexploited exchanges. We will look at context, we will look at purpose, we will look at problems and solutions. To illustrate the current state, can you help me, please? Yeah. Dans l'autre sens. Là. Okay. C'est bon. Oui. To illustrate the current state of our African stock markets, let's have a quick overview. We are talking about 32 very fragmented stock markets for 54 countries. We are talking about over 2,400 listed companies, a total capitalization of 1.6 trillion US dollars, representing only 1.68% of global capitalization. We're talking about an association of 25 African stock exchanges, usually called ASEA, which aims to develop exchanges between members and improve global competitiveness and provide an adequate platform of communication. The major stock markets are those of Southern Africa, North Africa, and West Africa. Over the years, we have many studies that establish the connection between capital markets and economic development. An efficient and strong capital markets is like fuel to economic development. It has been proven that funding public and private businesses through market result in transparency, improved governance, and lower burden of debt. The social impact also is obvious. We're talking about reduction of unemployment, global well-being, and a larger redistribution of wealth. Here, you can see that the evolution of IPOs over the last 5 years. As a matter of fact, IPOs are generated by privatization of public companies, voluntary admissions, and private equity exit. Unfortunately, as you can see, not only the market is very small, but is always strongly declining in number of operations and declining in number of listings. We have occurred 30 IPOs in 2017. We only occurred 8 in 2021. Whereas on a global scale, we have more than 2,600 IPOs in 2017, growing from 1,500 in 2017. Yet, we have estimated to more than 2,000 public companies in telecom, water, electricity, and banks out there that we can privatize. So, what is going on? Why are we performing so bad? Of course, we've done quite a few the last few years. Not all is, bad, but obviously it's still not enough. The good news is the causes are known, the solutions are known, identified, and implementable, and now I think it's time for all to channel to action. It's time for action, my dear friends. We have a very low market attractiveness. Fees are expensive, accessibility is not easy everywhere, forex and fiscal barriers are numerous. We have low liquidity market, only 3.75% liquidity turnover. We have low market debt, very limited investors base all across the continent, high fragmented market. We are talking of a capitalization ranging from 1 billion to over 100 billion on the 32 stock exchanges. Debt through banks is preferred to private equity. Why is that? Maybe the panel will let us know in a few minutes. Our governments and private companies prefer raising funds outside the continent than within the continent, which does not make sense. Like I said before, the solution to our non-performance are already known. First of all governments, all as one, must make this matter a priority, a political priority, and must drive a common strategy to drive a performance and liquidity-driven stock market. Government must maintain a steady economic environment and business-oriented regulations. Secondly, all the ecosystem must work together. We have several stakeholders, and each of them, have their own objective, own agenda. It can only result in the absolute beauty of an energized supply and demand of capital and totally secure savings. Thirdly, financial education and raising awareness at a very early age in society will help reinforce culture of savings and help people discuss money matters openly. We tend to hide when it comes to money. We have to hide and talk it in a secret room. But let's discuss it out there. I will continue with the very fundamental and ambitious African Exchange Linkage Program, AELP, that has been launched in 2021, with 7 members so far. Their goal is to have one global market across Africa with the possibility of raising and investing funds across physical barriers. BLVM, WACMIC, and SADC has been good baby steps. I think we can learn from those experiences and accelerate ELP. Then I will end with digitization, which I think we should highly enhance customer experience and capture the younger generation's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, to my point of view, for a brighter future of our continent, we are condemned to work for a well-regulated, well-efficient, and integrated stock exchanges by carrying out all these key solutions. Now, I would love to hear my dear distinguished panel on the two questions very dear to my heart. How do you see the future of our stock markets? And what are the challenges faced while implementing the solutions? How do you reconcile trade with the ZLECAf dynamic going on at the moment, and financial integration? I thank you, everybody, for your attention. I hope you enjoy the discussion.
Merci beaucoup, Estelle.
Thank you very much, Estelle. I'm going to call upon our panelist, Osemi Dlamini. You can come on stage. Kusini Dlamini, Chairman of MassMart Holding. Dr. Felix Amenve, CEO of BRVM and President of the Society of African Stock Exchange. Khadija Fadiga Coulibaly, Managing Director of Hudson & Co. Keshav Gore, Director for Treasury at IFC, and Sydney Tixera, that is Executive Director from Capital Market Commission of Angola.
On stage. Donc pour les gens qui sont dans la salle, la discussion.
For others, we are going to discuss in English and French, so if you need headset, it is available. You can ask our stewards. So as I've said at the onset, we've seen with the presentation of Estelle the various challenges of African Stock Exchange. The idea of this panel, and it's still the idea of AFIS, to find solutions and come out from this discussion with clear proposals that could be implemented and not coming back on the difficulties that we all know, because the idea here is move forward, and that in 1 year or two we can have another panel with problems that will have been solved. So one of the solutions that Estelle talked about is the privatization program. Estelle said that so many public companies in Africa could be privatized through stock exchange. So I give the floor to Mr. Menove on this matter. Thank you, Frederick. Good morning, good afternoon, dear all. It is a privilege and a pleasure for me to be in this panel. I think everything, this stage is set, and in Africa, the stock exchange is not that developed. It's true that they are recently created. We need to emphasize on that, because apart from South Africa, Morocco, and Egypt, most of African stock exchange were created in 1990s. Now, we're going to ask one fundamental question: how a huge continent like Africa, known for high growth, is unable to drag investors and develop stock markets that will help to accelerate its development? And he said that 25 years ago we were having same issues and same solutions were identified. So the problem for me is the implementation, and the implementation supposes, and it cannot be applied only for stock exchange, is that we need a real strategy for implementing our solutions. We need mechanism of control of various objectives that we have decided and pegged to every action, and then we must identify solutions and try to address the issues. It's true that privatization is one of the inputs of stock exchange. We have three. Estelle talked about it: privatization, voluntary admission, etc. And the general observation shows that these three means are the means through which companies go to stock exchange. Why is it not functioning in Africa? And especially when it comes to privatization, I have identified three reasons. The first one is that we lack political will. Without political will, a strong one, of course, privatization could not be done and help us reach introduction in stock exchange. I think that is clear. We need first to send a clear and loud message to our various leaders so that the question of privatization be much more of a clear political will with a roadmap helping to make privatization a way of contributing or revamping our existing economies. However, we have three advantages for privatization. There is betterment of governance and redistribution of the wealth in the population. I think the last argument that we started uh, showing years back started bearing fruit. We need to explain to our various states that they must not be investors in companies and remain for 20, 30, 50 years. Companies must come out from companies in which countries must come out from companies in which they invested, and then they must give the various actions to the publics and then redistribute the riches to the population. And I think that this has worked in Cote d'Ivoire because at BRVM on the 45 companies that we have, 20 comes from privatization in Cote d'Ivoire. And tomorrow we will launch another operation that is a privatization one. So for me, the political will is paramount to bring privatization on the market. Solution number two, we need a awareness raising program for building capacities, and this will be focused on the leaders of state companies and employees. If they are not part of the privatization process, we cannot reach our goal. Most of the time they are set aside, most of the time they just have the news at the latest time, but they must be concerned at the onset when we want to do privatization for privatization to be a success. The last item that I want to talk about is that we must envisage how to reinvent mechanism that will assure the success of privatization. And this is not obvious, of course, because when we speak to some state, they say that they are not sure that the operation will be a success. And to my mind, when it comes to regulations, you must create conditions for institutional investors to come and accompany privatization operations. It is the case of the various funds that have been created, retire, retirement funds. We need to accompany all privatization funds, and I think we can imagine some other mechanisms that work in other regions, having uh, some funds, intermediate funds that will help each companies either to enter the market or come out from the market. So thank you very much. That was
The privatization program, I think you want to add things. Maybe try to explain why there's a lack of political will about that.
Thank you, Frederick. First of all, I'd like to thank AFIS, IFC, Jeune Afrique in Togo for organizing this event. I think it's a special event, special gathering, and I appreciate the fact that we're discussing these very pertinent issues in our everyday lives in Africa. Regarding the privatization program, I agree that the political backing is important, but alongside that, we need strong political backing. The program needs to have a clear vision. It needs to be aggressive, and you need to stick with it, even though there might be setbacks. I believe in Africa we have more similarities than differences. but I don't want to assume anything about any other African country, so I'll speak a little bit about Angola. So in 2019, we launched our latest privatization program. And at the Capital Markets Commission, we took advantage of the issues that the previous privatization program registered, which was a lack of transparency, a lack of clarity, and traditionally it's just, it was a very obscure process. So we took advantage of that and we tried to kill two birds with one stone. Obviously, we need companies in the stock exchange or else we were not going to get paid. So we worked with the central government in looking at the list of companies that were to be privatized, and in particular sectors like financial sector, telecom sector, energy, and even transport, what we call the sexy sectors. We looked at companies that we thought initially could be privatized through the stock exchange. And we had political alignment, we had political backing, and then we began. So in 2019, right, we launched a program. And as I said, once you start the program and you open up these companies, you realize that, whoa, there are a number of issues here that initially these companies would not be able to be privatized through the stock exchange. But like I said, you got to stick with it. We worked with the companies, we worked with the financial intermediaries. And so over the time, we were able to privatize 94 companies, which is a good rate for us, I think, we believe. But only 2 of those were IPOs, which happened this year. So if you can imagine, from 2019 to 2022, we only managed 2 IPOs and 3 years later. But there were two banks. So one happened in June, and it was, well, I don't know how well you guys know Angola, but it was Banco Bay. It was one of the major banks in Angola, and they issued 10% of their shares that belonged to the state. It was oversubscribed at, I think, over 58% oversubscribed. The shares were issued at $45, $46 a share, and it's been performing well. 2 months later, another bank, it's Banco Caixa Geral de Angola, BCGA, also issued 25% on the stock exchange. It was also oversubscribed at 42%, and it's also been performing well. So just to conclude this initial question, I think obviously political backing is important, but there are going to be inevitable hurdles, and you must stick with it if you want to continue and believe in the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's not only political will, it's also preparing the companies for IPOs, and also the issue probably of corporate governance. This is one of the issues we're going to discuss. I wanted to address Mr. Keshav Gaur, because we're talking about the equity capital markets, but we also have the debt capital markets, which are also important and maybe a bit more successful in Africa. What could be done, Mr. Gaur, to develop local debt capital markets?
Thank you, Fred. So, from fixed income perspectives, actually, we have a lot of experience. So we are, well-known international issuer. Every year, we roughly issue $12 billion in multiple markets and currencies, and increasingly, we are issuing more in domestic capital markets. So, in the Africa region, we have issued in many countries, including Nigeria, Namibia, Zambia, South Africa, WEMU region. And our experience is, first, it is always helpful to have foreign issuers, good creditworthy issuers, issued in the local market and list on local exchanges. So what happens when a DFI like IFC issues in a local market? First is, it's a big demonstration impact. So it's a signal to offshore investors that yes, the countries are ready for foreign issuers. Then we provide, also solid credit asset for local insurance companies and other investors, pension funds, etc. Also, what we do is we tend to crowd in foreign investors, because there are a lot of foreign investors who want to take exposure to local currencies, but they don't want to take exposure to credit risk. So our issuances in domestic markets listed on local exchanges attract foreign issuers to the extent local regulations allow this. And when we actually do issuances, we follow the whole process and very intimately know what are the problems, what are the issues, what are the improvements possible in the issuance process. Then we circle back to regulators and provide our recommendations. And when these are implemented, the wrinkles are removed for the whole market. So apart from that, there are other points also touched by previous speakers. It's very important to look at regulation and legal framework. And we have a lot of experience on that side because we also provide advisory services to governments and regulators. So we have, in the World Bank Group, we have a program, an initiative called Joint Capital Market Program, where we have mobilized resources across the World Bank Group, and then we provide country-tailored advisory as well as investments to have a systemic impact in capital markets. So to give you a concrete example from the WEMU region, we have, three-pronged strategy. We are focusing on harmonizing the capital market environment among the 8 countries. Then we are expanding, doing recommendations, making diagnostic reports to expand the institutional investor base and also encourage foreign investors to become active in the domestic capital markets. And lastly, we are introducing new tools for the capital markets and improving the existing tools. To give you a couple of concrete examples, based on our recommendation and study, we had the green bond and social guidelines. They have been adopted by the local regulators and have implemented. And as a result of that, we had a WEMU corporation issue a green bond last year, compliance with the guidelines that have been promulgated. So I believe this will bring more, issuers, more green bond issuances in the region. Another example is we also helped draft the market abuse prevention law that has been adopted. So this law basically provides, a framework, a legal framework to control and avoid market abuse, like market manipulation or insider trading. So the objective is to bring more market integrity and investor protection. And doing that will, again, bring more institutional investors to the markets. Financial markets, capital markets are basically a matter of trust. So you need to create an environment where you can prevent market abuse. There are many such examples, but restricting myself to my few minutes, I will stop here. And if time permits, I will share more such examples. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Keshav. We discussed the offering side, and we'll get back again on the regulation issues just a bit later. But it is also important to ask and to talk about the demand side. And I will switch to French to Kadidiatou. Je pense qu'il y a ce qu'on appelle.
We have what we call financial education, issues of corporate governance, which are important, as well as digitalization. Offer may be increasing, but we also need to deal with supply. Thank you, Frederick. Thanks to the organizers of this event. Let me take you through financial education, and I will tie up this need to the operation of green bonds. You just mentioned Charm. Edson, which I'm honored to lead, was lead manager on this operation. Indeed, we structured that issuance in commercial real estate in Côte d'Ivoire. Based on certification, we've been able to issue green bonds for buildings. When we issued that bond, investors did not look at it because of its quality in terms of green operation. Unfortunately, it was a very first operation, and investors were not well equipped to review that operation in terms of its green quality. And that has had an impact on pricing, maturity, and investment and that operation. It was a successful operation. Obviously, it made it possible for the investor to reduce its loan rate, and it was refinanced in green on the market. Through financial education, getting the investors to understand the relevance of that operation, why green operations are good for them, we can have a bigger scale. The regulator, as we speak, in the financial market, IMF, decided to set up in its prudential framework the stakeholders, the brokers, SGEs, to use 5% of their income, revenue, their turnover, and reinvest it into financial education. These are huge amounts of money which will allow us, as we speak today, will allow the sub-region to develop financial education towards the investors. In terms of decision, they need support for them to understand quite different products as compared to the structured products. Back to the issue of privatization. Indeed, with BRVM and the Abidjan Stock Exchange, 3 waves of privatization, or what I call ivoirisation, that is having more Ivorian shareholders that have concession of public services granted by Côte d'Ivoire. After the 2 waves of privatization, which I know, which are developed by my colleagues, we have a new wave, as we speak, of entrepreneurs, shareholders of companies that execute concessions in a PPP arrangement with our states, and they execute adequately the concession, and they are ready to alleviate the investment and share with local investors, because these shareholders, quite often, these are private companies, international private companies, took the risk, be it in Côte d'Ivoire, Niger, developed for some years services that were required of them, and today they can transfer through the market with private Ivorian companies and move to another deal that withdraws political will or water down political will, the worry to manage the various challenges when we want to privatize the other way of doing things. That is to make sure that companies enter into the stock exchange.
This is important on digitalization, because this is one of the key aspects of increasing the demand and also the accessibility of investment, and also the digital transformation of the sector is very important. How do you take on that? Yes, of course, you're right. 2 aspects. The first one, which is on the demand, which is the access to the market. How can we engage in a subscription? How can an investor have an access to a broker and have share of stocks? And even today, our markets, we have cross-cutting ways, and all the stakeholders, we have the obligation to have this digital connectivity. We call it the online stock exchange, when in actual fact we're offering digital platform with applications that are mobile apps that helps investors to open accounts, to use those accounts as well. And the second aspect, which is the underwriting, and the central, the settlement bank, which is the institutions of the BRVM, they are working on a project to facilitate the underwriting to the primary operations, so that the underwritings can be done very quickly, and the time to the secondary market can be reduced, which is also important for the investors. On a market, we've gone through periods where the underwriting for the primary and the disbursement and listing on the secondary markets, it took 3 months and more. This is huge with this platform. Now, investors that could get connected to their intermediation company with their mobile apps, can open accounts and can also have subscription on the markets with a shortened time that can help them 3 days as the time of the subscription on the secondary markets that can help them to sell the position later. So while this is what we are examining and 12-18 months, and this is an innovation on the market. Well, thank you so much. This is part of the solution, this digital transformation. I'm now going to give the floor to Mr. Lamine, Kusene de Lamine. You will be the bad example, Kusene de Lamine.
Of Massmart, and Massmart is actually in preparation of delisting. And it's a major company. One of the issue you're raising is the issue of corporate governance, because if you want to be on the stock exchange everywhere in the world, you have to have strong corporate governance, and it's a real difficult topic issue in Africa. So maybe just a word on the delisting of Massmart and explaining why, and maybe a word on corporate governance issues.
Thank you very much, Frederick, and thanks to the IFC and Jeune Afrique for getting us all here from our different countries to have a very important conversation over 2 days. Just starting with the delisting of Massmart, that's actually a positive story, Frederick, in the sense that Walmart, which owned 53% of Massmart from 2010 up to now for the last 12 years, has decided to buy the minority shareholders who own 47% of Massmart. Why is that a good story? Firstly, it's a massive and resounding vote of confidence on Massmart as a business. Secondly, it's also an overwhelmingly positive vote of confidence on South Africa as an investment destination. And of course, needless to say, an overwhelmingly positive vote of confidence on Africa as an investable continent when we see the world's largest retailer and the world's largest company in terms of turnover investing and doubling down in terms of increasing its stake in Massmart with a view to support the business to continuously invest and profitably grow and expand across different parts of the African continent. So I'm really very excited about that. Having said that, I'm also deputy chairman of a company that's in the process of listing in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which is a fintech company. So while I'm delisting one company, I'm going to be listing another company to make up for that. So we sort of balance the scales there. So when it comes to the issue of corporate governance, Frederick, I'd like to say it is an indispensable prerequisite for any company that wants to access public markets to be able to have a very strong foundation of good corporate governance. That has got to be part and parcel of the whole architecture of governance and management and leadership of the business from day one. That is something that is very important. Why is it important? Because it makes a company listable in the ultimate analysis, and it also makes the company's journey to the stock market to be sustainable, because we need to make sure that there is transparency, there is accountability, there is proper systems of risk management, we've got proper internal controls to prevent fraud and mismanagement of resources, and that we also have proper accounting systems. So we've had globally and locally in South Africa, seeing massive companies being involved in accounting irregularities, which is a euphemism for fraud, companies that are listed in the stock exchange. So I think as we nurture and try to harness the power of the private sector in Africa, we've got to be very deliberate, we've got to be very intentional in making sure that the companies are fit for purpose and fit for the market. As a business person who's operated and continues to operate on the African continent, I've done a lot of due diligence exercises, different companies in different sectors. Some of the companies lack the basic fundamentals of good corporate governance and proper management that will make them to be listable.
Thank you, Kuseni. And on this topic, do you have one or two concrete solutions to improve corporate governance? What could be done, I don't know, by the regulator or the companies to improve this corporate governance?
Yeah, I think one solution is really just to be very scientific about it. Go to business schools, have business schools intervene where required. We've got institute of directors that are there in different countries. We have to strengthen those institutions, make sure that business people go for proper training. To be an entrepreneur alone is not enough. The other company that I'm chairman of, Aspen Pharmacare, was founded by two entrepreneurs in Durban. They realized from day one that they've got to manage the company along world-class corporate governance lines. And as a result of that, recently we got a $600 million facility from the IFC and other multilaterals to expand our vaccine manufacturing operations in South Africa and elsewhere on the continent. So this is something that we have to be intentional about, we've got to be deliberate about, and we've got to embrace it. At an African continental free trade area level, I think there has to be a conversation around the fact that we heard from Estelle how fragmented our stock markets are. But how do we then build regional centers of excellence? How do we scale up the stock exchanges that are there, give them more capacity, support them with more resources from an AU level so that we have regional stock exchange champions that anchor sustainable, efficient, and functioning capital markets on the continent.
Thank you, Kuseni. On en a parlé tout à l'heure, donc c'est un sujet qui est vraiment important derrière tout.
This is very important. We discussed that regulation is key, and also we need to have regulation fit for purpose, case of core.
Or maybe the lack of regulation, I don't know, that are inhibiting the growth of capital markets in Africa.
Yeah, so Fred, what we are seeing from our side is the market needs a lot of innovation. And innovation will come by creating right regulatory and legal framework and removing obstacles. So I'll give you some concrete examples, this time from Kenya. So, Kenyan government has the top priorities, one is sustainable infrastructure and affordable housing. So we worked with Kenyan regulators in designing, operationalizing, and licensing, the whole framework for mortgage refinance companies. So once that framework, the legal framework was put up, then we also helped create the first mortgage refinance company in the country called Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, KMRC. Then we helped the company to capitalize itself by going to the capital markets. We provided an anchor investment role, and company was successfully able to issue successfully 7-year funding, which was also a milestone for the local market because local market had seen very few, I believe only 4 or so capital market transactions over the last 5 years, and that also for maturities of only 5.5 years. So this is an example where a regulation created a specific structure which is critical to meet the housing finance need of the economy. So regulations like this will bring in innovation. Another example, the other, what Kenya has also done is they have mobilized funds, using pension funds and channel the funding to an infrastructure debt fund. So this is Kenya Pension Fund Investment Consortium. This is first of its kind in Africa, actually a very good innovation, where you have created a structure where you are mobilizing funding from pension funds to create an infrastructure debt fund that will then channeling the pension fund to infrastructure projects. So innovation is extremely critical. I can give you one more example from the Wemu region. This is a transaction that we had participated a couple years back. This is the NSIA SME securitization. This was the first time in the Wemu region that a commercial bank loan securitization was done successfully. It was a huge target, ZOF 40 billion, and it was very successful. This was the transaction where, ABS securities were issued by an SPV, where the underlying were cash flows generated by SME loans made by NSIA Banco Diwar. So this transaction was listed on the regional stock exchange, BVRM. It was rated by the local rating agency, West African rating agency. And it actually, our participation in the transaction encouraged other investors to also participate. And it made the other investors familiarize with this kind of a structure. And I believe market is going to see more such transactions. I know a couple are in the pipeline already. So, the big point I'm making here is the innovation. Introduce innovation, fill the gaps in legislation where you can bring more investors and more issuers to the market.
Thank you, Keshav. I'm sure that the other speakers have feedback to give on the regulation side, no? I don't know, Sydney, Kadi, Felix, what kind of a new regulation, or how can we adapt regulation to accelerate the growth of capital markets?
Well, talking about regulation, it is fair enough that the market has its own regulation. This regulation aim to put in place the framework that can help us to develop both the issuance and also the request of securities. And beyond the regulation of the markets, there are some other regulators that are moving around the ecosystem of the market. They have to follow through the momentum of the market. Institutional investors, for instance. Yes, at the market level, we can create regulation that promotes the development of OPCs to street funds. We can do so many things on the market. And if behind the insurance company do not have a very streamlined regulation to invest in this market, if pension funds do not have a proper regulations to the capital market development, we're going nowhere. So to me, regulation is not only to develop a market. Regulation is not only in terms of the market side. Regulation should also deal with other stakeholders of the market ecosystem to allow them to promote the development of our markets. And allow me to say as well that about the demand of technology, digitalization, it is good. Digitalization can be used to promote the development of the markets, but it is crucial to harness digitalization through innovative products, because we should not continue thinking that particular investors will come just on the market individually based on their knowledge of the market. No, we need to harness them through the products. We have OPCVM, yes, but we can also have saving plans for the SMEs as well. We need new products that will channel investors, and this is very instrumental in my opinion. Thank you. Kajidachu, Sydney.
And then the new product segments?
Je crois que...
I think Dr. Amenove said one thing very important. Let me continue what he said concerning the ecosystem of regulations when it comes to stock market. It is very exhaustive. But when it comes to debt market and the rate, we have the problem of diversification of the basis of investors that touches all investors. This is to allow all investors, be it in countries, to intervene, and a lot of work has been done. And when it comes to implementation, we were a little bit late to adapt the financial products for it to be clear for international investors. I think there are reforms in all our countries, and it will help to have a simpler analysis of our instruments, because the products as emitted in the past with the regular amortization, there are many things that were facilitating the contribution of international investors. But I think with the help of IFC we can reach that goal, because the market is very closed when it comes to the high level of problems, and in 2023 we need funds to finance our projects. Collection is very difficult, and it is not going through classic means to come on the stock market, and I think that's what I can say, that solutions that has been seen, it's in the meantime concerning SGOs and the project of the various plans is not yet implemented, but we hope it will be done next year. Thanks.
Okay, I'd like to emphasize the need for smart regulations so that we do not regulate ourselves out of the market. If we regulate, it has to be with a view to promote global competitiveness, to position African markets as attractive places where to list. We have to look at markets such as Singapore, Hong Kong, Canada, which have been very successful in terms of attracting pools of capital or pools of investment interest to list there to access global pools of capital. And we also need to think about incentivizing companies to list in our stock exchanges in Africa so that we can build a scale. As we know, we heard from the introduction that we only have 3 countries or 3 stock exchanges in Africa that have got over 100 companies that are listed. Whereas we've got 112 companies, which are African, that are listed on the London Stock Exchange. Maybe the starting point is to target those 112 companies that are listed on the London Stock Exchange and ask why they are not listed in Africa, if that's the case. And secondly, what can we do to be able to entice them to come and list back in Africa? I think to have a free market approach that is sound, and of course balancing it with the necessity of regulation that avoids or prevents market abuse, is the balancing act that we need to craft.
Thank you very much. Sydney, do you want to add anything on regulation? No?
Thank you, Frederick. Well, as the regulator here, obviously had to say something about regulation, and I think my colleagues here on the panel mentioned it, but essentially regulation needs to be aligned with the state of the market. So unfortunately in Angola, I would say that we took a different approach, which was if you build it, they will come. So we built a very high-end regulatory framework, which we can say made it a little bit difficult for companies to list. So with this new board that I'm a part of, we're 2 months in, we've already started looking at regulation and see where we can maybe make more flexible. But at the end of the day, we're here to protect investors. So that's our, I was at the central bank roundtable yesterday, and they talked about their mandate, which is inflation, and they're focused on inflation. So our mandate is to protect the investor above all. But we also need to make sure that there's an actual capital markets. So obviously we need to get paid, because if there's no market, there's no need for a regulator. But our primary mandate is to protect the investor. But we also need to look at where we can make regulation more flexible in order to drive more listings, drive more participation in the market.
Thank you very much, Sydney. We're going to take questions from the audience. Donc si on peut faire circuler un.
If we can have a mic in the room. While this is being done, we've talked about African solutions to the various problems. Khadija, to mention it, I want Felix, please. You were talking about the interconnection project of stock market, because it could be an African solution to the various difficulties that are known today. How can it change the game? Yes, actually the diagnosis is crystal clear to my mind, and it lays emphasis on two important aspects. And as indicated, there are hindrances. The question of liquidity and depth of our market, as he said it quite well. Why African companies are going on the London market and they are not interested on the local market? The reason of these companies is the weak liquidity and the lack of depth. And in our Association of African Stock Market, we said if that is the case, we are going to address the issue, we are going to find a solution. We have fragmented markets in several countries, and how why not coming together, create a platform that will allow us to channel the resources of the continent and improve not only liquidity but also the depth of our market. Uh, Actually, we had three solutions. First, imagine what African Union thought about for 2023, 2030, having one stock market for the African continent. You see that that causes so many political sovereignty problems, and the practicability is not that obvious. Solution number two is to imagine a strong integration of our market, and the last one is interconnection. What is interconnection? It is just making the quotation system of Africans to be seen by all. Today, if you want to see what is happening in South Africa, you need to connect yourself to the negotiation system of Joburg and Morocco. If you want to know what is happening to Morocco, you must get connected to the country. But with interconnection, we have a unique register. As investor, you go on the platform, you see on the 2000 companies that are in Africa what is the demand of Sonatel, SGBC, EMT in Ghana, etc. So you have this possibility to decide to go and buy in this or that market, having in mind but that you are compliant with the your regulation and then the regulation of that company. So it's interconnection of our quotation platform with the putting together of all our data. This is done for us to run all the analysis on all companies. That is a first step towards that integration. Thank you very much. Do you have questions in the room, please? And introduce yourself before asking the questions. Mike is on the way.
Bonjour.
Good morning. Shabi. We are a fintech that is focused on CBDC, and the first interconnection step of interconnecting the various stock markets of Africa is not very extraordinary when you talk about decision making. But if we try to project ourselves on the long term, how can we solve or address the various issues that you've just mentioned? First, the domestic constraints of the market, and then the foreign constraints of people coming on the local market. And particularly, I'm thinking about the settlement of actions when you talk about impediment, because you're in an intermediate situation that's different from the actual situation. So that's it. Thanks. Please, let me just say that our approach when we face a problem is to make it simple and start with a single solution. We have in our global analysis all the aspects that are taken into account. If we want to solve them before thinking about interconnecting African stock market, we will not meet our goal. We try to make the problem very simple by giving the way to investors to have a one-stop shop in their markets. We know that the question of centralization, conservation of securities shall be on the table. We are going to solve that issue. It will take a little bit of time, but we need to start because we are convinced that AFCFTA PAPs that are wonderful integration tools when it comes to the African continent, they must be accompanied with an integration of the stock market to solve at the onset the question of development of the private sector before trading. So we entered a dynamic of a simple approach, and later on we are going to solve the complex issues and move forward. So thank you. I think we have another question. I'm Mika Ibokung. I am from Bluebank News from West Africa, and my question is for Khadija too. When it comes to the operation that you're describing, you said that the pricing is not the ideal one when it comes to the green projects in construction projects. So I want to know, we are out. We just ended COP27, and one of the major problems is how to unlock the green financing for Africa. And I want to know what are the various hindrances that prevented us from having the pricing that you would have wished for. Thank you for this question. I've said that the pricing could have been better. It was already good. The client was happy, but it could be better. What was lacking is financial education of investors, so that emphasis might be laid on the green quality of the various obligations. Apart from that, we are dealing today with issuers. It is the matter of understanding of actions and steps that will help us reach a certain number of certification and structure ourselves for us to make green emissions. So we are at the onset, and the question is about the use of the carbon credit, and people are used to the that there is the question of ISO certification. They are used to that, but once more, financial education on these specific projects are important, because we cannot have certifications, that is international certifications, because we don't have certification agencies in our countries. So there is an actor that is lacking. But even though we have them, they will come on a ground that is very empty. We companies that have not taken the lead to better management, be it wastes, a plan that will come in a context where there is zero carbon emission. So I think we need assistance on this topic. It will allow us to have an ecosystem that will allow us to emit green obligations for people that are able to have green obligations.
Well, thank you. That'll be the closing remarks. Thank you so much for you, Mr. Dlamini, Mr. Menove, Mrs. Fadig Koulibaly, Stera. Thank you.
Et puis je vous propose d'applaudir nos...
A round of applause for our speakers. We're getting to the end of this event. These two fully packed events. Please, can you please join that in a few minutes? We're going to start the closing ceremony, so you don't need to go out, please. We're going to have a great closing ceremony to end this event. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.